Welcome to the Power Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Bio. Join me as we uncover how setbacks, challenges, and failures can become those pivotal moments that lead to purpose-driven, fulfilled lives. Each week, my guests and I will be sharing stories, insights, and tools to help you reclaim your power and show you how life's biggest challenges are happening for us, not to break us, but to redirect us toward the life we deeply desire. Whether you're here for inspiration, mindset shifts, or just to feel more aligned in your journey, you are in the right place. So whether you're catching a break, powering through, or squeezing in some me time, let's dive into the lessons hidden in life's ups and downs. We're here to embrace every unexpected twist, moving toward a life of passion, purpose, and authenticity. These stories, they are proof that you too can make those shifts happen. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Power Shift. I am your host, Maggie, and today I have a very special guest, Christina Wong. We actually were just having a very intimate conversation around really being able to live in alignment with our true authentic self with a passion and a purpose to have a more fulfilling life. And so today we're going to kind of dive deep into what does that truly mean? Maybe how long does it take? And also kind of some other things that we can work through together when you are on a path of trying to find your true authentic self and live a more fulfilling life. So, Christina, I'd love for you to just pop in and tell us who you are and what it is that you do. And then let's kind of dive into the juicy details about living in alignment authentically and a more fulfilling way.
Amazing. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I can't wait to dive in with you. And so I'm a personal growth coach, and kind of what you were talking about, those things that we all do where we might be aware that we're doing it, but for some reason we can't seem to stop. We feel stuck. We're like, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why do I keep doing this? I help people identify those things, understand where they're coming from, and start to release them so they can start to incorporate new tools and things that will help them live in more alignment with their true selves, with their core values.
Yes, and it's so important because I think if you are anywhere near social media right now, it's an era. It's a let's reclaim ourselves, let's step into our power. And it's so important. And I think that a lot of times we fail to really even know what that truly means. I believe that for me, it happened about 5 years ago on a whim, and it was more of like I just kind of stumbled into it. And so I think a lot of people right now are grasping at what we have, and I think the true kind of pullback from a lot of people or the resistances is, well, why me, or is it possible? And I think that you and I can both be very telling to that it is possible. And each and every person has the ability to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I
And
absolutely agree.
yeah, and I think that a lot of times we think it's so far away, or we just think we're not worthy. And so I know that you've talked a little bit about through your Instagram and things you talk about perfectionism, self-esteem, relationships, and all of those things I think play a very important role in who our authentic self is at the moment, or who we have maybe tried to become or tried to do. And let's talk about that a little bit, Christina, where you feel like if you're out of alignment, maybe what does that feel like? Or how does that look to somebody who's saying, well, I feel like I'm authentic, but I'm not really fulfilling my life, and I'm not feeling that I'm really making that impact, or that living with purpose, I guess.
Well, that's exactly how it feels for me and in my experience and with other clients that I've worked with is you're waking up, you're getting through the day, you think you're doing all the things that are on your checklist, or you are getting them off your checklist, but you're going to bed and just not feeling grounded in yourself. You're feeling like there's something missing. I feel stuck and I don't know what to do. And I'll say for me, for so many years, for most of my life, a big piece of that was the perfectionism and the people pleasing, right? And doing all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, that I thought or I was told by people who love me and society at large, this is the way to create a happy life. And learning to really embrace the idea that there's not a one size fits all for how to live, for how to be happy. If there was, we'd have it figured out and we would all be doing that. And that's clearly not the case. So it can feel really challenging to have to dismantle all those stories that we've carried around and maybe we thought they were ours and they're not. And so that's been a big part of my journey is like, oh, I thought I had to get married, have kids, and that would make me happy. Turns out there's a way to do that, to be happy without doing that. And if you have kids, if you are married, there's also a way to connect to yourself while still being a good mom and being the kind of partner that you want to be. So,
Yeah, I think that that is so important because I myself, I used to have stepchildren, and I do understand how you can lose yourself in life, your relationship, your children, those things. But I also feel like for the listener out there that is single or is in a relationship but doesn't have the kids, we still have the same types of things that hold us back, that make us, have that resistance. And we I think we tend to think it takes all day long to work on ourselves.
yeah.
And yes, we're a work in progress. And I'm here to tell you, I've been working on myself for far longer than 5 years, but really genuinely for 5 years. And I know that it's just the beginning. And we kind of chatted about that already, that there's no timeline to it. And so I think that to talk about that a little bit with, you know, we 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 are feeling like we're going to bed each night and we're unfulfilled and we're stuck and we're not here and but then we start to think about, well, what is this person going to say? Or are my kids going to get taken care of? Or all the other things going to be okay? And in my experience, all the other things are way better when we do take the time for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so let's kind of talk about that because I think that we all tend to think that it's this massive production. And I like to say, I'm not your average mentor. I'm not going to tell you that you need to journal for an hour and you need to take a bath and you need to, affirmations. I don't I don't think that that's necessary. Like you said, it's not a one size fits all, even in your heart and your dreams and the way that you get to your authentic self.
Mhm.
And you have to figure out what is it that makes you light up inside. Because hey, if I don't like to journal, that's okay.
Yeah.
If I don't like to do affirmations, that's okay, but you've got to find that gem for yourself that does make you feel more aligned with who you are and connect inside. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Is there something that you have done that you feel like has really helped you kind of align to that person or make sure that you have the non-negotiables? You're not maybe people pleasing all the time, not being too perfect.
Absolutely. And I will say all of the tools that you mentioned, taking a bath, doing the journaling, doing the affirmations, they've all held spots in my life.
Absolutely.
And yeah, at different times and for different purposes. But the one that has made the biggest impact is reconnecting to my body.
Mm.
Because for so long, it was me living in my head and just thinking my way through everything. And I wasn't feeling things. I was kind of cut off at the head and kind of numb to what experiences my body was having. And then that was showing up in terms of like shingles and getting sick all the time. And so I really had to take a deep look, excuse me, what is happening? I thought I was doing all the right things. Why is my body kind of fighting against me? And so tuning into what a decision feels like in my body. Does it feel expansive? Does it feel constrictive? What is it that my body is trying to tell me? And so when I've reconnected to my body and made that a priority, that's how I know how to make decisions from a place of alignment, is tuning into how it feels versus what I think, what I worry about. And so that's been the biggest game changer for me.
And when you say that, I automatically went to like the autopilot. We're in this
Yes.
autopilot response. We're in this autopilot. I know I'm guilty of sometimes you drive somewhere that you've been so many times and you're like, oh my gosh, did I even stop at that light? Was that green? Was it red? That's how you are acting like with our thoughts. We tend
Yes.
to just think through or jump through a hoop just to say, okay, here we go. I'm going to start this. I'm going to do this and really kind of aligning with what it feels like in your body. I know for me, about 6 months ago, I kept waking up thinking, I know I want to do this, and I know I have this dream, and I have this passion and this vision, but there was something in my body that felt so almost toxic, and I felt like, am I going back to that toxic relationship? And you have to remind yourself that toxic relationship doesn't necessarily have to be with another person. It could be the toxic relationship inside of
Yeah.
yourself, not allowing yourself to feel those feelings and not allowing to really take a step back, I think. And so that's what came to my mind was like the autopilot. Our responses are so quick. And then we're like, well, shoot, I really actually didn't want to do that. Or, well, this happened. And then I said yes to this person. And so let's talk about that a little bit, where it's like when you feel the feeling, instead of just automatically spewing out what you think other people will want to hear, take a step back and maybe align with yourself. And I think when you say that, people are probably like, well, how long do I have to wait? And I think most oftentimes our responses are so quick that we don't even have a chance to feel the feeling. And the feeling comes pretty quickly in my experience. So how could you explain that to somebody that, is maybe in this people pleasing, this kind of just going with everything it's always been this way. And oh, it's just,
Yeah.
if it's always been this way and you don't want it to be, what has to happen? You have to
Yeah.
make a
Yeah.
change.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on it. It's slowing down, right? I mean, we live in a culture that thrives on us rushing through life,
Mm.
right? Because then we're numbing out by buying, by scrolling, by doing the things, and we're not taking the time for ourselves. So when we do that, when we slow down, we are forced to face whatever's happening inside more. And so for me, there was a lot of discomfort. So instead of just somebody asking me, can you do this? Can you help me with this? And me automatically saying yes, it was uncomfortable to say, can you give me till tomorrow to get back to you on this? Or can you give me a couple hours to double check my schedule? And then I was giving myself the gift of time of slowing down. How would it feel if I said yes to this request? How would it
Mm.
feel if I said no? And so getting comfortable with that discomfort is something that takes time and practice. And we're not going to be perfect at it. But that's also a big piece is like, oh, I can handle the discomfort of this. I am also not responsible for somebody else's emotional experience. I can be considerate of it, and that's lovely.
Mm.
But their emotional experience is not more important than my emotional experience. And a lot of us have been taught just the opposite. I know I was. So,
Yeah, and listening to that, there's so many people sitting here going, "Oh my gosh, this is just," and that's what I like to even just capitalize on is the simplicity of a lot of these things is truly just taking a step back. We're not asking
yeah.
you to, cancel plans and this and that, and it's about just taking the step back for yourself, and like you said, giving yourself the permission to double check your schedule, because a lot of times I think we get excited and sometimes we say like, yes, I'll be there, and then in all reality, after we've thought about it, we're like, well, crap, we've got, XYZ in the morning, we've got XYZ in the afternoon, and now I have to go here. And then we start to kind of feel that
Yeah.
feeling,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it's so important that in any type of situation that you have is to take the step back, and I like to call it just the pause, and
Yes.
I loved how you worded it too, where it was, let me get back to you on that. How
Mhm.
simple is that? A lot of times we try to think about what the other person's going to say before then we respond to then,
Yes.
well, what are their emotions going to feel like? So then we just automatically say yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think that's so cool that, just using that. So write that down, that it's not about, I don't know, let me try, let me see how the day goes. And then it's like make that decision, that deciding factor to say, you know what? I got to think about this. Let me make sure it fits into my calendar and I'll get back to you. You
Yes.
protect your energy, but you also then let that person know you have boundaries and you have
Mhm.
respect for yourself. And also you're respecting that person too, right? Because that other person isn't just sitting there thinking, well, she's a maybe, she's a this, she doesn't really. It's almost like you're clarifying both ends of the situation. And that's very
Yes.
important, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, it's you're being clear about your intention to get back to them. You don't have to give an answer in that moment. You don't have to decide in that moment. But it is courteous to say, I'm going to get back to you on that,
Yeah.
and then to follow through both for yourself and the other person.
Yeah. Okay. So what I
Yeah.
want to kind of talk into is I want to get a little deeper with you in
Hmm.
a way of, we talk about the alignment and we talk
Yeah.
about fulfilling our lives and we talk about that internal feeling and we want to pause and reflect and decide. Was there a moment in your life where you felt like you were just, like you said, you were waking up really just stuck and really, what was that change in your brain, though, to then say, okay, I do want to do this? What was the change for you? Because I know we've talked about kind of how, but like, what was that shift for you? The power shift that felt to you, it was that moment that you thought, well, I don't want to do this way
Yeah.
anymore.
So I've had a number of them, and so one was I in a kind of past life I was a cake designer, and so there was a shift from kind of an office 9 to 5 job into that, and it was a feeling of I'm dreading every day that I'm here, and that's not a way I want to live life. Okay, it feels scary the next step of like pursuing this business, this dream that I have. Can I be curious about it enough to take that scary, imperfect first step? And then I had another moment when it came to relationships. I was just kind of one kind of short-term relationship after the other. And I was like, this isn't what I want. I don't know what I'm doing that's keeping me stuck here, but I am stuck. I am the common denominator. Can I ask for help? Am I open to exploring what am I doing that I can't see without judgment, but with a like compassionate heart?
Yeah, and
And so,
Christina, I want to stop you there for just a quick second
yeah.
because what you just said is a lot of what we need to repeat
Mm,
is the common denominator because a lot of
yes.
times we like to blame game, we like to do that. And so I am one that is very honest with it that I allowed my behaviors and the things and the actions and all the things in my life. And so when you just said that, I want you to repeat that out loud that it was the common denominator, not necessarily someone else.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Is that because we're trying to align with ourselves? We're not trying to
Yeah.
align with anybody else. We're trying to authentically align with ourselves. And so you have to then have the awareness to say, oh my gosh, the common
Yes.
denominator, the lying underlying issue might be me. So I would like you to kind
Yes.
of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of shame we can hold around taking responsibility for how we're showing up in the world.
Mm,
And when we can do that with a kindness for ourselves of, you know what, I don't like how I've been doing it, but this exists as some sort of protective mechanism.
right.
So instead of scolding myself for this, Can I hold compassion for that part of me that needed to feel safe and didn't have a better tool to do it at the time? And can I kindly release that pattern? Can I learn how to release it so that I'm not continuing this? And so for me, I mean, you mentioned earlier this moment of stepping into our power. For me, that is about taking responsibility.
Mm.
And it's not about, again, berating ourselves, but oh, I am playing a piece here. What is my piece? And how can I respond differently? And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and that right there is you don't berate yourself for it. It's happened.
Yeah.
All the experiences are happening and they're feedback in our life. But the feedback, I just spoke about this weekend. Like, if your feedback is sounding pretty much like the AM stations that are just kind of, you got to take the feedback. And I think a lot of times when you can understand your feedback and realize that it has a little bit to do with yourself.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
oftentimes I think, like you said, it's it's what we've been conditioned to
Yeah.
know and learn, and we don't realize this, but we're programmed, right? We're programmed
Yes.
from a very young age. And
Yeah.
we've just, so when you think about it, it's like that rebooting of your system, but you can't just do that overnight. And I know that we spoke about that before we push record. And so let's talk about that too, because we've talked about feeling the feeling. We've talked about kind of stepping into your power and owning that. But also let's talk about like the timeline, because I know people say, well, it's been 5 minutes. Okay. How long were you in that relationship? Or how long have you been treating yourself that way? Or how long have you been, kind of the underlying factor here. So let's talk about that, because I know for me, my experience is it's not ever going to end. But
No, yes.
let's talk about that as somebody who is like, okay, I have the feelings and I'm really doing this, and the timelines, because I think that's the thing that needs to be debunked is you
Yeah.
see people on social media, you see this the highlight reel, right? We all talk about that. Everybody looks like they have it all together. We just spoke about that this last weekend as well. Like, everybody has it together. No, they don't. And just because I was on stage doesn't mean I have it any more put together than the person that was sitting in my audience.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that, like the timeline. I think that that's so important.
It's incredibly important, especially like you said with social media. We're often comparing our beginning to somebody else's middle, and it
Hmm.
it it can feel like, well, how am I ever going to get there? Which just feels so, defeating, and like, why even bother starting? I'll never get there. And I know when I started work with a coach myself, after being there for a few months, I was like, when is it going to happen? Because like I am putting in the work. And she reminded me, we don't know if it's here or if it's a little further out. You got to keep showing up for yourself. And it will happen. And having that trust in ourselves during the process is one of the hardest parts. We want to wake up tomorrow and notice the differences, the changes we've made. But those changes happen in mere moments. They happen in the decision that we made yesterday to say, hey, let me get back to you on that.
Yeah.
And as we build those new patterns in the moment over time, that leads to big change. And I remember talking to someone a few years ago about that, how it's the small incremental moments that lead to change. And they really struggle. They're like, then what's the point? I just want the big leaps. And I was like, well, it's when you look back that you realize, oh my gosh, look at the changes I've made. And maybe you find yourself in a situation where you weren't as reactive. Cheer yourself on. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, this time last year, I would have been spiraling, and I'm not. And so it can be hard to remind ourselves that when we're feeling impatient and like, when is this hard work going to pay off? But I also find that's when it's most important to reconnect to your why.
Mm.
Why did I start this in the first place? Why is this important to me? And for me, the whys are, my core values of growth, of connection, including connection to myself. And that's what keeps me going day by day.
Yeah, and it's so important because I'll tell you right now, when you were talking about that, it hit me right here too, because I used to have some sort of behaviors that I didn't really love. And I had to address them and understand that those were some of mine. But, you know, I catch myself thinking, wow, I'm thinking differently. I'm acting differently. I'm behaving differently than I would have. I always call it the old Maggie. The old Maggie would
Yes.
have. And
Yes.
it's like this new Maggie has this new sense about what is going to help me propel forward and what is the old Maggie is that version of like, almost like the pity party or the stomp your feet, like it's not happening, playing that kind of victim mentality of like, oh, this is how it always has been, so it's going to always be this way.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to talk about that because
Hmm.
like you said, well, in the world we live in, it's pretty instant gratification.
Yes.
We want food, it's Uber Eats. If we want an outfit, we go to Amazon and it's on our doorstep in 14 hours.
Yeah.
But with our own growth and our own fulfillment, we can't put the timestamp on it.
No. No.
And it's so important to understand that because we all want it. I don't know if I've met anybody that says, like, I don't want to be happier. I don't want to be healthier. I don't want to have, some dreams come true.
Hmm.
And so if we have those, we can't necessarily say we know what's going to come next. And like you
Yeah.
talked about a little bit ago, that courageous step, being courageous enough to think, let me try something new.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I talk about that all the time. If you don't try, you won't know.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a good point too of we have, for most of us, decades of living this way, of reinforcing these patterns. So
Mhm.
it is not going to happen overnight. And in my experience, it happens in layers, which is
Right.
also why it doesn't always seem obvious in the moment of, oh, I am coming back to myself. I am releasing things because it happens in layers with what we're ready for. And so it takes time. That process is constantly unfolding, and there's no finish point. There's no finish line for personal growth. It's a constant thing, which can seem daunting before you
Yeah.
start. But for me, there's a kind of a bit of comfort of like, oh, there's no point that I'm trying to get to. How can I show up today? And then repeat tomorrow. How can I show up today?
Yeah, and I think that that's important to talk about too is that it's how do you show up in the moment?
Yeah.
Because I know for me, I'm like, well, how do I show up? Because we've heard that, show up as that version of yourself that you want. And it's like, okay, if you're not that visual or you're not the like holding on to that already, or you maybe don't even have the feeling of her yet or
Hmm.
him yet. You're at this point in your life where you're like, I know I want it. Well, visualize her. Okay, well, what if you can't? Like, I like to talk about it too, is that you don't always have to know what it's going to feel like, look like, act like, sound like, talk like, but all the things. You just have to know, like you said, your why. What
Yeah.
is it because you want connection? Do you want more fulfillment? Is it because you want happiness? What is the why behind trying to find your authentic self or trying to live the more fulfilling life. Or maybe finally stepping into the version of yourself that you know you've always wanted to be. I mean, and it's that's just it's so powerful. Yeah, to if you don't have her yet and you're like this big magnificent picture of her, that's okay. But
Yeah.
like you said, just taking those steps and each and every day and every moment, and then also like we've talked about becoming aware of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
What was the action that I did today that was different than old version of me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you said, it's the layers. It's just like if we went to the gym,
Yes.
okay, we don't just defluff overnight. We fluffed up over years. And so
Yeah.
it's that layering effect. And I think that that's what's so important is for people to understand that no matter what you do each and every day, if you're thinking more into yourself and the feeling inside of your body, that's connecting to your authentic self.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Yes.
people want this answer. Well, what does it feel like? What is, and it's kind of almost like it's up to you to decide,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I think for me, I was always trying to feel like, okay, well, what am I supposed to feel when I meditate? What am I supposed to do when I journal? How am I supposed to have this? And all those feelings start to kind of overwhelm. And I think that's exactly like you said. Most people then think nothing's happening.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
growth isn't there. This hasn't happened yet. I don't feel like I float,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I
know?
don't feel like I float, just for the record. I don't feel like I float.
Yeah, I don't float. I mean, there's times where
Yeah.
I feel like I am floating because I
Yes.
have, I have done the courageous action in the step,
Yeah.
like even just stepping onto a stage and looking, and the bright lights were blinding me so much that I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is the feeling I want to have.
Yeah.
That's when then you can embody those things. But if you never
Yeah.
step out of that, you're not going to ever feel the feeling.
Right. Yeah. And these feelings aren't like everything is temporary, right? So there is not a, oh, 24/7, I feel completely in my body. I have to bring myself back to my body constantly. And that's how I start my day is by connecting to my body so that the rest of my day, at least that was my starting point. But another thing that I was thinking of as you were talking is grief, the grief that can come with these shifts.
Hmm.
Because as we are kind of releasing things to embody new things, to invite new experiences in, we are also having to say goodbye to previous versions of ourselves, previous ways of living, and maybe even some relationships. And so a lot of us can get stuck because there's guilt and shame around maybe the story of abandoning people in our lives in order to reconnect with ourselves. And especially if you have a history of people pleasing or perfectionism, that can be very, very strong and challenging. So just want to acknowledge that for anyone out there who feels that it is normal. It is not pleasant, but it is normal, and you're not alone in that.
Yeah, and I just spoke about this in another episode is it's a process.
Yeah.
I think we all think that it's like I think we actually might have before we pushed record, but we talked about that it's not just you wake up the next day and we're floating.
No.
We're making the steps at each day. So I really like that because I think that that's what's so important. And as the listeners are listening, I have to understand they have to be feeling the feeling of we are not superhumans,
No.
the ones that are taking and finding ourselves. I think this new era of the, who's your authentic self and healing your childhood wounds and this and that. I think it's such a time right now that it's the perfect time to have these really good conversations around. It's not something that you're gonna feel like this whole new person and this whole new vibe. For me, my grief is still here 5 years later. I still have times where I get triggered. I still have times where I feel, that I walked away from certain things. Now, because
Mhm.
my life was toxic, pure hell, but there was still certain things where my identity was there where it was like, I like this, and you connect. So when you talked about that, like letting go of things, you do have to have the process. You have to grieve through those things. And somebody listening, how we've talked through the cycle now, I want you to re-listen to this. We've talked from beginning to the middle to, ooh, maybe we go back to the beginning again to feel that because I think that's what's so important is that the process, the layers, the difference that you're going to feel can be microscopic. But if you start to feel into the microscopic feelings, every time you step into that person, it's going to start feeling like you're floating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like coming home, right? And instead of looking for that outside of ourselves
Mm.
in the stuff that we do and the stuff we buy and in other people, we start to find it within.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's a really beautiful, challenging, but beautiful process.
Yeah. And that right there is what we all need to hear again. There's been so many moments right now where it's like push pause, rewind, and do it again because it's already within you. Hence the power within her, my Instagram page. I believe your Instagram journey is what's yours?
It's journey back to self.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so hey, hello, rewind. Let's just talk about that because it's journey back to self, power within. Those are very broads of our own thing, but it's talking about that same concept is
Yeah.
that we were all born with it, and through life and experiences, it's been stifled down or programmed to a different frequency. And it's now time for you to journey back to self, power within you, find it, and then really start to live that way. And like we've talked about over and over in this episode, it doesn't happen overnight and it's not going to feel different immediately, but it will if you are serious enough about taking some action.
Yeah, I'll just tell you a really quick anecdote from my life is years ago, it was like 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, I started dating somebody who's my current partner. We only dated for a couple months. We were not in the right spot to be together. And nothing terrible happened. We just kind of went our own ways. And then actually during COVID, December 2020, we got back in touch. And the first time we got together, so it had been 4 years later. So the day of our first date 8.5 years ago was the day of my first coaching appointment as a client.
Mm,
And so when I saw my partner again, within 10 minutes of just kind of chatting, he said, "That's crazy because you're the same, but you're different."
mm.
So it was really interesting just to hear from someone who I hadn't seen for 4 years that they noticed it. So again, like I didn't notice it in the way he did. He
Right.
noticed it right away.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that because that is proof of the pudding, right? It's
Yes.
that and I'm sure when he said that to you, what happened? You started like floating.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
it
probably
feels
perked up a
great.
little
Yeah.
and you might have pulled up the sleeves and you probably fixed your hair. Because that right there showed you have been working on yourself. You've aligned with yourself and now you're able to have a different type of conversation. We're always going to be
Yes.
the same person, but we have a different identity about us and it's because it's the authentic
Yes.
version of ourselves. And I have that same kind of a feeling. I was in a 10-year long relationship, thought that that was what it was, and that was just the thing. And then once I decided to start taking care of myself, the person who is now in my life that I'm engaged to is a completely different person than I would have ever thought possible in my life. But it was because I now am authentic and I show up the way that I am. And so all the things in my life have been more authentic, more genuine, more fulfilling, happier. And so I like to point that out too, is because when you're off in one spot in your life, oftentimes it bleeds into everything else.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when you take the step back, and sometimes, people think that, oh, I cut this person out or I do this, and then it's like, it's just this evil thing. But
Mm.
it's not an evil thing to then actually protect your own energy. And then even look what happened. You guys reconnected, and it was just like this, and now you are, still together. And it's so that's just so rewarding to hear
Yeah.
that, when you show up in a different way for yourself, people notice. And then when people notice, guess what happens? You want to do more of the thing.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I just find that because we're taking off layers of masks that we've been
Mm,
wearing that most of us didn't even realize we were wearing, right? And
right.
so we start to draw in different experiences, different people, different relationships with our authentic self than, we were drawing in when we were wearing all these masks.
Mm,
And it's until you go through it, I mean, I know it can seems so abstract to hear, but it really is so rewarding where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this lined up in this way. This is incredible. I never would have imagined myself having this experience. But you've been doing the work on yourself. You've been reconnecting to yourself and allowing your authentic self to show up in the world. And the world doesn't need another cookie cutter person. It needs you. It needs your light. And it's supposed to look different than other people.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. So, so good. Well, Christina, I really loved this conversation. I would like to just kind of tie it all together, wrap it up, and just really, truly, I want the listener to really, truly realize that we went from start to finish, but with the finish being that this is where it continues.
Yes.
And so we've given you some ideas of even through our own experiences in our own lives to be able to come back to yourself, journey back to you, power within you, the things that are there for you that are really truly, they don't cost anything either. I like to talk about that too, because a lot of times we're like, I don't have the money to do the things. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do to start your journey without having to look outwards. And that's how my journey began, was I was like, I need to figure out me first. Then, of course, yes, coaches and things have all evolved through time, but when you're first starting out, be gentle with yourself and
Yes.
give yourself the permission to feel into the body, feel into the emotion. So, Christina, I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you first and foremost. And then, what I'm liking to do is the end of the episode is give us a little, I'm calling them mic drop moments of just what would your biggest tip or advice or a mantra or something that somebody could take away with walking away from this episode.
So I will say, I'll start with just kind of the logistics. So on Instagram, it's Journey Back to Self or Your Journey Back to Self. I'm like drawing a blank on
Yeah.
that one, but
Well, I'm always
my
like,
one,
wait, okay, yeah. And it'll be in the
yeah.
show notes, so no
Yeah.
problem.
Website, that one I'm more familiar with is yourjourneybacktoself.com. Honestly, all of my content is on there so that it is accessible for people. So you can scroll through it and see what resonates. And I will say I've been doing mirror work lately. And one of the things that I have been telling myself is it is safe to be you.
Mm.
And repeating that every day. I don't want to show up as somebody else. I want to show up as me. And it is safe to be me.
Wow. There's no explanation necessary for that. I want you to sit with that as a listener. I'm going to sit with that as well because I think it's so important that we were all born us.
Yes.
And that's where it lies. So thank you so much, Christina. This was an amazing conversation. I just cannot wait for the listeners to hear all the juicy stuff. And it was so exciting to have you. So thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in to The Power Shift. I hope today's episode inspired you to see setbacks as stepping stones and embrace the beauty in the chaos. Real growth happens when we align with our true selves and live unapologetically. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps more incredible people like you discover the show. Until next time, keep making those power shifts and step boldly into the life that's authentically yours.